As we move forward, I have the distinct honor to get to introduce my boss. And he is fabulous, and he is here all the way from Jersey today, so yay, traveling everywhere. So today we're going to be having Luiz DaSilva, who is our inaugural Executive Director of CCI. We are in our 5th year, we're our 5th year anniversary, which he has been part of. He is internationally recognized for leadership and innovation in wireless communications and networks research. He has over 25 years of experience in academia, including 18 years, actually now 20, right? We're moving on up, as a professor at Virginia Tech, and where he is the Bradley Professor of Cybersecurity in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. So he is our co-host here in this building, and thank you again. Dr. DaSilva, come on down.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone. I have 2 mics. I don't know if they're both working. Okay, cool. Welcome belatedly. Yesterday, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here, but it's a pleasure to see you all here at Virginia Tech and in CCI. And I'll take the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about what CCI is. Hosting this workshop with SRS is a special pleasure because I've known some of the principals in SRS since they were undergraduates, stumbling into my class early in the morning at Trinity College Dublin. Where's Justin? I remember him distinctly. Yeah, half asleep, right? So, that was maybe 15 years ago or so, and it's really great to see all that they have achieved in SRS. So we at Virginia Tech and CCI, we're also partners. We use srsRAN extensively in our labs, and we have been able to maintain this relationship. So Paul invited me to talk a little bit about what we do, of course, mostly in the context of Open RAN and open networks. But I need to put this in the context of what the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative is, because I actually have 2 hats that I wear here. One, I'm a professor at Virginia Tech in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, but I'm also the executive director of this not so new anymore initiative called CCI, right? So we're now 5 years old. It's hard for me to believe that it's already been 5 years. We started around late 2019, early 2020. So for those of you who are not familiar with the region, Virginia, and CCI was created by the Virginia General Assembly and the Governor's Office to bring together what are now 46 universities and colleges, so throughout the entire state. So that includes everything from 2-year colleges to private universities to 4-year Research One universities like Virginia Tech, UVA, ODU, and others. It's not just about wireless networks, it's really about cybersecurity, but it ends up that wireless networks is a particular area of focus, so securing those networks. And that's because historically, Virginia Tech and other universities in Virginia have been very strong in this area. So we've been doing research in wireless networks for about 30 years at least. If you're familiar with people like Ted Rappaport or Charles Bastian or some researchers that were in this field at the inception of 1 and 2G, essentially. So we ended up investing quite heavily in wireless networks, adding the expertise that we have at Virginia Tech to UVA, George Mason, Old Dominion University, Virginia Commonwealth University, and many others throughout the state. The reason that the state decided to create CCI is really driven by economic development. It's unusual in the US for states to invest in research. So most of the research in the US happens through federal funding, so NTIA, NSF, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, et cetera, and through industry funding, so the private sector. And usually states kind of are not in that game. What Virginia did was to create this initiative because it recognized a huge need, especially in cybersecurity. So there's currently about 100,000 professionals working in Virginia in cybersecurity, and there are currently 50,000 job openings in that area. So a third of the total jobs in the state are currently open. That's, of course, a huge area of need for our continued economic development. One thing to remember in terms of Virginia as a state is that we are very, very close to DC. We're about 10 kilometers if you're European, or 6 miles if you're American, from the border with DC. So there's a lot of federal government work that is aligned with cybersecurity as well as with wireless networks. Pentagon is in Virginia, the CIA is in Virginia, there's the CISA is in Virginia. So there are a number of agencies that are relevant that sit here. And there has also been a lot of private sector investment in the state. So Amazon has put its second headquarters in Virginia. It's not far from here in Alexandria. Boeing changed its headquarters to Virginia. There is a ton of data centers throughout the state. So there's a lot of private sector investment that also is aligned with cybersecurity. So the state decided it was time to invest, created this consortium. It's led by Virginia Tech, but it has participation from 46 universities and colleges. And we were given 3 mission lines, so research, innovation, and workforce development. So I'll talk a little bit about each of the mission lines, but I'll focus more on the research because I want to talk more about wireless networks and 6G and open networks. There's about 350 faculty members throughout the state involved in this, and a few thousand students from undergraduates all the way to PhD students. I think yesterday you heard from Luiz and others at CCI about our test bed. So we operate a test bed that is an open RAN compliant test bed, and it's actually an OTIC center. There was a question about OTIC. And our portion of that test bed is upstairs, just 1 floor up, but we also have an outdoor portion of that test bed that sits in the main campus of Virginia Tech, which is in the southwest corner of the state, so it's right here. That's about 4.5 hours drive from here, so it's a big state. So we have an outdoor component of the test bed and an indoor component, and there's additional components in other universities throughout the state as well. Okay, so 3 mission lines: innovation, workforce development, research. In terms of innovation, of course, the focus is how do we translate the research that happens in lab in each of these universities into commercializable IP. So that can happen through licensing, that can happen through spin-outs and startups, engagement with the startup ecosystem, and so on. It turns out that 27% of the venture deals that happen in Virginia are in cybersecurity. So that's a particular area of interest in terms of innovation. We also track how many spin-outs we create. So these are companies that have received early funding from CCI, so internally. Usually the founder would be a faculty member or a student in one of these universities, and that have now incorporated in Virginia as a company. So we have had 5 of those in the last years, most of them in the last couple of years. So in the last 2 years, for example, we had these 2 RAM Phantoms, which is aligned with cybersecurity, but in the health care area, and AIoTI. It's an acronym that's hard for me to pronounce, which is about smart homes and how to preserve privacy and security in that context. We also work a lot with the existing startups around the state. So those are some of the startups and the venture capital institutions that we work with at the moment. And that's, those collaborations can be in many different ways. We place students in these startups. We provide internship opportunities. We pay the stipend for those internships. Sometimes we paired the startup up with someone in one of the universities, a professor, for example, that has the expertise that they're looking for. Sometimes we have what we call project-based learning opportunities with these startups and so on. So part of our mission has to do with how do we innovate in wireless and in cybersecurity, with particular focus, of course, on Virginia. So Virginia-based startups and spin-outs. Another of our missions is workforce development, and that's probably in the minds of the politicians, probably the most important of the three, because it's really crucial for economic development to keep attracting investment from the private sector. It's a matter of national security as well, so it's front and center in their minds. And in the context of Open RAN, we also found ourselves this need for workforce development. So we started the test bed about 5 years ago. So I joined CCI, I should say that before coming back to Virginia Tech, I spent 11 years in Ireland at Trinity College Dublin, and then I moved back to the US to lead CCI in March of 2020. So March 16th, 2020, I'll never forget that, because it was a very weird time to be moving between countries and to be starting a new endeavor. And at the time when I came in as the inaugural director, there was already the plan to have what was then called the 5G test bed. And then I came in and I decided, okay, let's refocus this on the next generation, and we ended up calling it the NextG test bed. And we decided that we needed to build it out of open source components. A little bit later, we ended up aligning it with ORAN and joining the ORAN Alliance. But to build the test bed, of course, you need a lot of expertise. So we said, okay, let's hire some engineers. So not just rely on professors and students to build a test bed. So first of all, it was extremely difficult to find. So very quickly, we discovered that there are no engineers with expertise in this area that we could readily hire. And then if we found this person, we could probably not afford them, to be honest, right? So we are a university. We hired someone right out of their bachelor's without the full expertise that we needed, to be honest, but to do some IT management of the test bed. And then the person got an offer from a company. We hired them at, I don't know, $100,000 a year. Got an offer for $120,000. Said, okay, let's match that offer. 2 months later, an offer for $150,000, and it's like very quickly we discovered that it was not really possible to afford those people, but also there were no people who had all the expertise that's needed, especially to build a test bed that relies on softwareized components. So you need to know about containers, but you also need to understand a little bit about wireless networks and wireless systems, and there's just no one in the market with that expertise. So what we ended up doing is we are forming our own workforce, right? So we are relying on students at all levels. So we have a few undergraduates, but mostly master's students and some PhD students, and they develop that expertise for that we need. But more broadly around the state, it's very important that we form more people with expertise in cybersecurity as well as in networks. So every couple of years we commission an economic impact study. So we hire a consultant to look into what is the economic impact of CCI. So things like how many jobs are created because of our activities. So for example, in fiscal year 23, which is the last year that we have data for, we have supported and created about 900 jobs across the state, which adds about $100 million to the GDP of Virginia. the consultants also tell us that each job that we create creates another job in the economy, right? So there is indirect and induced effects of any job creation. And then part of our mission in terms of workforce development is also to diversify the workforce. It's no secret that in cybersecurity and in wireless networks, we don't have a particularly diverse workforce, right? So gender balance is way off, and we are looking at how can we help diversify this workforce. A lot of our workforce development happens through internship and apprenticeship opportunities. So one thing that I would like to do today is not just tell you about CCI, but also issue a call for collaboration. So if you if you have interest and see opportunities to collaborate with us, we're very interested in engaging with industry, government, and other universities as well. One thing that's crucial is to provide students with hands-on opportunities to work in their future employers. So we do that a lot through internships. There's an odd thing in cybersecurity where there's lots of jobs, but if you graduate, it's very hard to get a job. So it's very strange because entry-level jobs often require a lot of things that are really not practical for someone who has just graduated, like 3 years of experience or a lot of certifications and so on. So we're trying to address that by providing students with more opportunities to work in their future employers while they pursue their degrees. So we have supported about 600 internships so far, about 300 research assistantships. So those are graduate students who are doing research in various areas covered by cybersecurity, and about 800 undergraduates to date. I'll skip some of this and talk about the third mission line, which is research, where I can talk a little bit more about the wireless networks and the open networks aspects of CCI. So first of all, since we have this investment from the state, one thing that we need to keep telling the state is what the return on investment is, right? So how do we bring benefit to Virginia thanks to all of the investment that they've made? And we do that in all of the three mission lines. So in terms of innovations, things like spin-outs and work with existing startups. In workforce development is opportunities for students to be placed in companies and also to remain in Virginia, hopefully. And then in research, one thing that we look at is how much research funding we are able to attract from outside the state. So we've been active for 5 years, as Laura mentioned. So we track that for every year. How much do we get in terms of new research contracts? And those, by the way, break out around 70% from federal government, 30% from industry. So in the first 3 years of CCI, fiscal years 2021, 22, we were pretty flat. Every year, we were bringing in about $35 million in funding from outside Virginia. In year 4, that jumped to $75 million, and in year 5, it jumped to $112 million. So that's the latest that we're getting. So we're about at $100 million in additional funding from outside the state to complement the funding that we get from the state. So the return on investment, according to the consultants that conducting the economic impact study, is about 7.5 to 1. So every dollar that we invest in research, we bring $7.5 from outside the state. So altogether, to date, we have attracted about $300 million from outside Virginia and about $100 million from within Virginia. So we're approaching the $500 million mark. And that's in many areas, and I'll talk about some of the other areas, but a lot of it is aligned with wireless networks. And so to focus a little bit on Open RAN, since it's the topic of the workshop, I think Tracy Van Brakel was here yesterday, and she usually does a fantastic job explaining the NTIA Wireless Innovation Fund, or Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. But at the risk of repeating it a little bit, I think everyone has heard of the Chips and Science Act. Chips and Science Act is a total of $1.5 trillion. Out of 1.5 trillion, there's 1.5 billion dollars with a B that are dedicated for the Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. So in the context of the Chips and Science Act, is just some money that you find in the cushions of your sofa, right? So, but it's actually a lot of is a big investment, $1.5 billion. And NTIA is managing these funds over a period of 10 years. And they have started issuing what are called NOFOs, or Notices of Funding Opportunities, the first of which was issued last year and funded about $140 million in new research. And we participated in a number of those projects in CCI, and we were fortunate to be funded by 6 of those projects. And in the first Notice of Funding Opportunity, there were 2 levels. There is a level that's around $2 million, so that's the 5 bottom ones that you see. So those are more research oriented, more fundamental research, so a bit lower TRL levels. Some of those would participate with industry. For example, we are part of a project with Booz Allen, and some are just academics. So the 2 that you see that only list Virginia Tech, it's all led and conducted by academics at Virginia Tech. And then there's a second level, which is a much larger level for large-scale proposals. And the Accord project that Tracy, I'm sure, mentioned is part of that. So the Accord project is a $42 million project led by AT&T and Verizon. And it's being conducted mostly in 2 sites. So one is upstairs in our test bed here. Another is a test bed at the University of Texas at Dallas. And those are kind of 2 hubs for the project. And there's participation from other universities and other sites throughout the state. And that one is under a part of the Notice of Funding Opportunity called Testing and Experimentation. So really looking at testing, and in particular testing of multi-vendor O-RAN solutions. So in the last month or so, our test bed received about another $5 million of equipment, to complement our initial investment. Our initial investment was all in open source systems. So the hardware was basically USRPs of various different flavors. And then we used the SRS stack, we used an open source core, and so on. In the last few months, aligned with Accord, we started receiving a lot more commercial equipment. So, for example, one of the first things that we're doing in Accord is testing interoperability between the CU and DU from Nokia and the RU from Fujitsu. And all that uses a lot of test equipment from Keysight. Then the next thing we'll be looking at interoperability between RedSys and Fujitsu. So we are getting a lot of commercial equipment that's aligned with that project. That's one of the most exciting projects at the moment, I think, for us. It's a huge investment, a huge opportunity to do things that are really aligned with the deployability of O-RAN, and whether O-RAN can really meet this promise of not just a disaggregated network, but one that relies on multiple vendors, right? So not simply disaggregated, but all coming from a single vendor. The picture was taken in this room, so in that corner over there. And if you don't recognize the people from right to left, Senator Mark Warner, the senior senator from Virginia, U.S. Department of Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. The next one is Representative Beyer, a U.S. congressman. And the next one is the administrator for the NTIA. So they were here basically announcing this $42 million grant. It's a very big deal in terms of the political impact as well. Open RAN is part of the U.S. strategy for next generation networks. Diversifying the supply chain is expected to lead to a lot more innovation, to lower the barrier to entry for new companies that could be based anywhere in the world. So it's a very important area. And that was the first notice of funding opportunity issued by the NTIA. Then later this year came out a second notice of funding opportunity, and that one was really aligned with open radio units. So again, there were two levels for that NOFO. So one a little bit smaller projects, one larger projects. The larger ones really aligned with how can ORUs be commercialized. The outcome of this notice of funding opportunity is not public yet or is not known yet. So it's expected to be released sometime this year, so before the end of the year. We were a part of a number of proposals. I don't know which ones will be successful. These are extremely competitive processes, right? So it's expected that there will be funding at the order of $400 million for this second NOFO. Also to mention, for those of you who are from outside the US, the first NOFO was really US centric, but NOFO 2 and in the future NOFO 3, by the way, it's a horrible acronym, I think, this NOFO thing, right? So, but anyway, we got used to it. But these NOFOs now are actually open to participants from outside the US as well. So if you are a company that's based out of the US or a researcher outside the US, you can partner with others and also compete for those funds. So we are anxiously expecting the outcome of the second NOFO. We expect the third NOFO to be issued this year. So towards the end of this year, we will expect this, which is essentially a call for proposals, to come out, and then for us to know the outcome of the second one. As I mentioned, we were really successful in the first one, and a lot of it was thanks to this investment that we have made in research facilities that ended up really well aligned with Open RAN. So when we started about 5 years ago, the first decision was let's use open source components, and that was really driven by the need of our researchers to have access to the internals of the hardware and of the software so that they could test new solutions and they could kind of break things and so on. So we aligned it with open source solutions like srsRAN, at the time LTE, right? So the LTE solution from SRS. But then when the Open RAN Alliance started to kind of pick up steam, we decided to join the ORAN Alliance. So we did that in 2021 and to make the testbed ORAN compliant. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two components. One is upstairs, this grid that you can see in the picture. There are 72 USRPs of different models in that grid. The other part is outdoor. So this is a much more rural part of Virginia. This is Blacksburg, Virginia, where the main campus of Virginia Tech is. We have installed 3 base stations. It's about a 1.5 mile corridor, and the base stations are installed in 3 locations. And you can see the pictures of the locations where they are. It's brand new, so we just installed the first antennas. And this testbed has dual use. So it has a production use, so it uses commercial hardware and commercial solutions, and the application there is flood monitoring. So it's really installed around an area where there's a creek, and the creek sometimes floods, so it's doing flood monitoring there. And then the other use is for research. So we use then research equipment and connect that to the testbed upstairs. So we have this connection between the outdoor testbed and the indoor testbed. And the other thing that's a bit unique is that we are using our own spectrum. So Virginia Tech is one of the few universities that has a license to its own spectrum. So the FCC a couple of years ago auctioned off CBRS spectrum, and we bid for a few locations, some of which we couldn't afford at the end, but we ended up with licenses that covered 2 counties in Virginia. including Montgomery County, which is where the Virginia Tech campus is. So we are using CBRS spectrum for the network. We also have test and license, test and trial licenses that we can use in other bands for experimentation. We announced with SRS this joint lab in 2023. We joined the NextG Alliance to also look into how do we transition some of the ideas from the lab into standardization. So we're very active in the NextG Alliance. We're part of the National Spectrum Consortium, and as I mentioned before, the O-RAN Alliance. So we also try to not just keep all the research that happens just in the lab, but also have an impact on the standardization and the development of these systems. I'm trying to focus more on wireless networks because, of course, that's the topic of the workshop. But in terms of CCI, let me just see how I'm doing on time. I have some time. No one's interested in lunch, right? So I can go for another 100 slides or so. But so CCI is about a lot more than just wireless networks. So we look at where our researchers are active, and this is a visualization of that, but I need to explain it a little bit. So let's just look at one of these charts, the one on the right, for example. So this is a mapping of where our researchers across the entire CCI, so all those 46 universities and colleges, where they're publishing and which disciplines they're publishing in. And the reason I like the mapping is because it shows how multidisciplinary this area is and how much there is across the entire range of disciplines. So the purple color is computer engineering, computer science, mathematics, kind of typical areas for cybersecurity and wireless networks. But as you move to the green area, so that's activity in the earth sciences. So for example, we have a lot of work on protecting the grid, the electric grid. A lot of it is also aligned with wireless networks. We also have a group on cyber biosecurity. So how do you protect biological systems and things like water systems against cyber attack? The red one is the health sciences. So we have, for example, a medical equipment lab where students probe medical equipments for cyber vulnerability. And even a child can break into most of those, right? So it's actually pretty scary to see the amount of vulnerability in that kind of equipment. And then the yellow is the social sciences and the humanities. So things like cybercrime, misinformation, disinformation, as a cyber attack, and so on. And of course, AI, we don't even look at AI separately because AI is right now pervading all of this. So there's AI work that's aligned with misinformation. There's AI work that's aligned with Open RAN and so on and so forth. The chart on the left is where we stood about a year and a half ago in 2023. On the right is where we are now. So that also shows like the evolution of the research ecosystem in CCI. I'll mention just very quickly this. So one of the many areas that we work with is actually the arts. So we have a whole program that brings together artists and cybersecurity experts to look at new ways to look at cybersecurity. And this year we are going to exhibit that in the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria. So if you are in this area, I'd like to invite you to visit. The exhibit opens on October 18th. So if you want to be invited to the exhibit, talk to me or to Laura, and we'll send you an invitation. But the exhibit will be there for 3 months, so it's going to be there until January. For our industry partners in particular, I'd like to mention this program. It's an NSF program called an Industry University Collaborative Research or Cooperative Research Center, IUCRC. Those are centers that are funded by NSF for industry to work with academia. And we just got funded for a center that we call WHISPER. The W stands for wireless. The rest I don't remember exactly, so not important. It's about 6G research. So the way it works is NSF funds us to run the center. And right now there are 3 universities involved. So Virginia Tech, we lead the center. George Mason University, also here in Virginia, and the University of Arizona. So we get funded by NSF. And then companies join the center and provide an annual contribution to the center. And the companies actually steer the direction of the research and select the projects that will be conducted. NSF only funds one of those per topic. So ours is the one in 6G, and there's no other. We are in the process of forming the center. We started on the 1st of August. We have our first meeting with the full set of members in February of next year. So if you're an industry partner, please talk to myself or to Jacek Kibilda about this center, and we're keen to have you join us. We're also part of another one of those industry university cooperative research centers called CyberSmart, and that one is in cybersecurity. That one is led by Georgetown with participation from Virginia Tech and Notre Dame. We also do a lot of international collaborations. So if you are from countries outside the US, we're keen to work with you. We find that about 30% of our research is published with co-authors that are based outside the US, and that is growing. We have a lot of relationships throughout Europe, with Brazil, and with Asia, and are constantly expanding those relationships. I'm going to just wrap up here. So those are slightly outdated numbers. So we look at the impact of CCI. The number in the middle is the research funding that came from outside the state in the first 4 years. And now we have data for the 5th year, which is another 112 million. So we have about $300 million of funding from outside the state. And then the other numbers come from our economic impact study. So in the first 4 years of CCI, we created about 2,500 jobs, about $200 million in labor income, and about 370 million in addition to the Virginia GDP. If you want to learn more about CCI, about what we do, the strategy, the impact, and so on, that's our strategy for 2030, so for the next 6 years or so, and some of the data that I presented today. And I'll wrap up here and take any questions that you may have. Thank you.